What's up, y'all? It's Mr. Ernest Krim III, your favorite Black History teacher. Welcome back to another episode of the Black History Saved My Life show. Yo, Black History saved my life because it gave me purpose. It gave me meaning. It led to my awakening as I fought against racism. I challenged my guests the same way. I asked them, what's your purpose? What's your meaning? What led to this awakening? In other words, what saved your life? Y'all, this conversation is so timely. I had the chance to sit down with a friend and ally of mine, Dr. Billy Snow. The conversation we had was great and it was eye-opening for me. We had the chance to talk about racism and white privilege, and I had to really dig deep and ask him some questions that I think that would not just be relevant to me, but to you all out there who want to do more to fight this fight. Now, this interview occurred before the national stories of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, but I'm telling you, y'all, it's crazy how relevant it still is. So check this out. Dr. Billy Snow is a nationally recognized educational consultant, speaker, and leader, and former superintendent who spent his career addressing racial inequity. His claim to fame is transforming the culture and academic success of inner city schools that have been labeled as failing. These schools primarily serve African American students. Because of his work, these schools experienced huge decreases in discipline issues, as well as double-digit gains in academic achievement and graduation rates. He was recognized by the University of Texas for his exemplary work in this field. In 2008, he was selected as Texas Elementary Principal of the Year and was selected as a National Distinguished Principal Finalist from Texas in 2011. In 2015, he was selected as one of 25 educational leaders from across the country to be a part of the Leverage Leadership Institute with Paul Bambrick in New York City. In 2018, he became a fellow in the Racial Equity Leadership Network. So make sure you grab a notepad, get ready to take some notes, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share this far and wide, and get ready to get into it, y'all. Black history saved my life. What's gonna save yours?
I want to throw you for a loop, all right? Because I'm a person that's big on these types of discussions and, top five lists and everything. And you told me you were jamming to some 90s hip hop before you got on this call. So I'm gonna throw you for a loop, curveball right now, on the spot. And you got to answer this question good, okay? Give me your top five rappers of all time, man.
Oh man. Well, I had to get jiggy with it with Will Smith. I had to respect my mama with Mama Said Knock You Out. I had to listen to some Snoop. Um, and we were rolling down the street. And then I would think that nowadays I would say Kendrick Lamar. So back in the day, there's a few that I love the most, but right now I was like Kendrick Lamar. And then, the 90s hip hop was the best. I happen to like, the Snoop, the Will Smith, I don't remember who wrote it, but No Diggity. Who did that song?
That was Dr. Dre, but he was featured on a song with like an R&B group kind. It was
Yeah,
Blackstreet, but yeah.
yeah, Blackstreet. Yeah, Blackstreet.
Yeah. Teddy Riley, yep.
I don't remember the name, but No Diggity was on a few minutes ago. So
Okay.
that's kind
Dr.
of my
Billy
thing.
Snow, tell
Okay,
the
I got
viewers,
you.
the listener, just who you are at this point in time in history and why you matter to them.
Well, sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me, and just thank you for all you do. I know that as you and I have connected on social media, I've been super impressed with your book about Black history, and have a story there where I connect with you, and all you're doing for kids is just so inspiring. I myself started off as an elementary school teacher. I became an assistant principal, and those two experiences were in middle class neighborhoods that were pretty diverse, but not predominantly African American or economically disadvantaged suburban areas. But I had a mama at home who was my hero. She was a single mom who escaped abuse, and growing up, I always played school. I knew I wanted to be a teacher. But when she had the courage to escape abusive marriage, I decided to become a teacher for those who needed me the most, man. And then went to be a principal at a Title I school. And when I got to that school, I noticed that 20% of my African American students were in special education. I thought something about that, but as a 29-year-old principal, I wasn't quite sure how to fix it. But in the time that I was there, we did. and drastically changed education for all of our students, but particularly African-American students. Then went to be a principal of another school that was 81% African-American, same statistics. And I went in there thinking, you know what? Why do they have the same problem? Why is 20% of African-American students at this school in special education? And what can I do about it? Let's try those things that worked. Had the same results, was promoted to area superintendent. They asked me, will you take all the Title I schools in our district? So they gave me two high schools, 2 middle schools, 2 intermediate schools, and 6 elementary schools, the only Title I schools in the district. And they gave it to me because of my skill set and my passion. And I was just like, that's what I want to do. After that, went to Shreveport, Louisiana. I did school turnaround work in Shreveport. That's probably the most rewarding experience of my entire life. Went into a system where 40% of the secondary teachers were long-term subs. Crime was at 52% of all crime happened in my neighborhoods. All the schools were F schools and failing, and turned them around in 2 to 3 years, and just created some amazing change for kids, focusing on equity. But that's where I learned that the systems, the institutional racism and classism that exist are created on purpose. That's where I had to confront my own privilege. Even though I grew up a single parent of a son of a single mom and economically disadvantaged myself, I had to confront my own white privilege in Shreveport, Louisiana. And then moving from there, went to be Chief of Transformation and Innovation in Dallas ISD, a system of 167,000 kids and predominantly a Hispanic population there. And then became superintendent of a district in Texas, Cedar Hill, that was predominantly African-American, and raised that district to a B state ranking. And then from there, started my own consultancy. And we started the Transformation Leaders Network. I lead consultants, and all we focus on is equity and school improvement, school transformation, and Title I schools. So my passion and my life experience has led me to this point, and it's led me to just kind of further solidify that, God put me in this position to make me an educator, make me a teacher, but the kind of educator that I was going to become is also on purpose as well.
That's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. So in my life, I mentioned, or I titled my book, Black History Saved My Life, because of course I had a widely publicized hate crime in 2016, and it made me reevaluate my life. And I realized through placing these connections together that I have been dealing with this issue of racism constantly. And the thing that saved me, of course, was learning about the history and learning about my true heritage and my true roots. And for me to fight against racism and fight to uplift my people, to me is a no-brainer, because if somebody looked at me, well, yeah, I'm Black. So if I learned about Black history and I'm inspired, I should be doing that. But in terms of your story, you speak a lot about white privilege. You don't have to fight against racism at all. So I'm curious if you can dig deeper into your path. You kind of brushed over it a little bit, but why is it that you, as a white person, you grew up in the South, and you said it yourself, you grew up poor to a single mother? Why not focus more on just poverty as a whole? Why go into this realm of race when you could simply turn a blind eye and say, it doesn't have anything to do with me? What's the purpose? What's the point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about it was a journey. I think that I did not know that was going to be my fight. When I was a student myself, I attended schools that were predominantly white. Even in my situation of poverty with my mother, I still went to predominantly Anglo schools. And sometimes I remember looking back, I would sometimes get this thought in my head about, why are some people so angry? Why do some people seem to have a chip on their shoulder? And so even in my position of economically disadvantaged living, I still had and was filtering race issues through a lens that was privilege, really. And I didn't realize it. It took me all the way until I was in my principal positions after I was a teacher. and after I was an assistant principal, to realize that there was something different and something wrong. And it was because I went into both of those positions and saw that the Black kids were over-identified as special education. They were in the office more. Their grades were worse. There was something wrong. And my mind said, figure out what it is. What is the problem? And so I started researching, I started studying, and I started listening more. And I would hear things like those kids, or we have those kids, or this school is changing. And it made me want to study how we could improve, can we improve more movement in our classes? Can we improve more dialogue or add more dialogue and more opportunities for kids to speak in our classes? And I started to approach it that way. And over the course of time, I saw the performance for African American children get better. And at 3 years into my principalship, my African American students were 100% passing math, 100% passing science, and our special education percentage had dropped to 3% from 20. And so I was able to kind of connect some things that made sense. When I went to Shreveport, Louisiana, though, that was the biggest thing. I walked into a situation where I was this white guy who was hired by a Black superintendent to lead school turnaround, and the schools were about to be taken over by the state of Louisiana. And some people were like, they would call hope or the white savior. Some people would, on the other side, would be like, well, who is he to ask us these questions or ask us about what we've done in the past? But I would ask questions at cabinet meetings. And I would say, why is it that my students have 50% of their teachers as subs, but across the railroad track, you have 100% certified teachers? Why is it that my schools have 27 kids in a class and 97% of them are below grade level, but there's 27 kids in a class at a magnet school and 100% of them are above grade level? And I would ask a lot of why questions. And I was struck by the fact that generally the Black persons at the table would not want to speak because that was the way it was and what they'd always dealt with. And the white persons at the table were openly hostile and rude about how dare I criticize what they were doing. And I'm the only one at the table asking these hard questions. And so it occurred to me that systems that were in place were created that way on purpose. And that when Shreveport was integrated, for example, in the 1970s, it was one of the last places to be integrated, that the system of magnet schools and private schools took over for forced integration. It was a place where whites could run when schools were being integrated. And so even after integration, that community chose not to integrate. So then I became a voracious reader of African American Black history. I became a reader and I became a learner. I also adopted mentoring students that I worked with. And when we led a competition called the Amazing Shake Competition, I would get to know certain kids like Markavion, and he became a part of my family. He had a background where he lived with a mom who had him when she was 16, no dad in the house, economically disadvantaged situations. But he caught 3 buses to get to city buses, trying to get to a school that he wanted to go to that was still economically disadvantaged and still one of the lowest performing schools. He went from 16 office referrals before we met to a year to 0 after we started our program. And I remember taking him home one night and we were passing by a power plant and we were talking about it. And the power plant was in his area and we started talking about it. And I was like, well, why do you think that power plant is there? He was like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, why isn't it in my neighborhood? And he couldn't tell me. And I said, well, what do you notice about the stacks, the chimney stacks at the power plant? What are they putting out? He's like, pollution. And I'm like, well, why would it be in your neighborhood and not mine? And why is your school failing and not the ones where my kids get to go to? And he didn't answer me. He just accepted his position as being the way it was. And I said, well, what happens when people put out pollution, or what happens when people get sick, or when not sick, when there's pollution in the neighborhood and things like that? And he surmised that people would get sick. And I said, well, okay, so why is that power plant not in my neighborhood, but it is in yours? And he said, because they don't care if we get sick. And he was very inquisitive. He was like a 7th grader at the time. And he was so inquisitive. He was like, they don't care if we get sick? And I was like, okay. And I was like, okay, so tell me about your schools. You have a substitute and your math teacher. You have a substitute science teacher. Why? And he could not get to the point himself where he was realizing that the system was created for somebody else. And I was like, well, my kids don't have any subs. And he was like, well, okay, so is it made that way? Is the system made that way? And it was that question. And I remember, and the last part I'll tell you as an answer to that question before we move on is just that he woke me up. The system woke me up. And then I took kids to Washington, D.C., a project where we took kids that had never been out of Shreveport to visit the Ron Clark Academy, the Civil Rights Museum, and in Atlanta is the Ron Clark Academy, the Smithsonian African American History and Culture Museum. And we went to go visit Mount Vernon. We went to go visit the Smithsonian. And we were walking along the hill at Mount Vernon, and Theodore comes up to me and he says, Mr. Snow, I just learned that they kept the male slaves here and they kept the female slaves over in a different place, and they only got us together like once a month. Were they trying to breed us like cattle? And I just looked at him, and I got tears in my eyes, and I didn't answer him. And he said, and Mr. Snow, what about my neighborhood? He said, I don't know anybody who has their dad living at home. We all live with our moms and grandmas. Is it possible that after 400 years of slavery and selling apart our families, that those cycles today? And I started to cry, and I said, well, Theodore, go talk to my superintendent, who happens to be Black. I said, I don't want to answer that right now, but I do want you to go engage with another Black man and go talk to him, because he married his high school sweetheart. He escaped a cycle of poverty, and he's successful. And I want you to hear from him. And as I watched them walk across the banks of the Potomac talking about slavery, I thought to myself, this is my purpose. These kids don't know their history. They don't know that the world has been created with redlining and Jim Crow laws and everything else that has been created. They don't really know what's created for me, and that they are from kings and queens and teachers and scientists, and that their history is not just slavery. They don't even know in my situation in Shreveport. So that changed my life. I think the first thing that saved my life and changed my life was my mother becoming my hero. Why would a white guy like me become so interested in that? If I had not had the opportunity to teach and lead Black children and Black educators and see what happens in the community, I don't think I ever would have become so alive and so awake to oppression and the things that have happened as to having actually experienced it. Because when you're in charge of and paid for fighting for kids, and you lead 10 schools that 90% of the students are Black and 90% of the educators are Black, and you encounter every day people across the table from you looking at you like you're crazy because you're challenging their system, that's when I decided that that was my calling. that's when I decided that I had to fight it on purpose, that it wasn't an accident that I was placed in those situations.
That's powerful. That, you know what? And we talked about this before, brother. That's a book right there. that is that is a book.
I'm
And
trying to write one.
yeah, you got it, man. And you bring up a lot of important, powerful points. And one thing I want to get back to eventually is I think it was amazing how you were cognizant of the fact that that was a question to defer to somebody who's lived through that experience. And I think that's important too, because even when you talk about the white savior mentality, you nip that in the bud. It's this is my experience. This is what I know. This is what I've studied. This is what I've seen. But when you ask me that type of question, it would be best if you went to somebody who could probably engage you and intellectualize you in a way that I cannot. And something else you touched on that's important too for our viewers to know is the purposeful disenfranchisement of Black people and other targets of racism in this country. And this is a question I want to ask you and to follow up then. You speak a lot about how exposure changed your life and how that saved you. Because that's a very important thing for me. The exposure of having to go from my red line community to a predominantly white school, I was able to see this ain't right. Things shouldn't be this way. And having the majority of my friends at that school, of course, being white, I noticed, of course, like we all do as adults, that kids aren't racist. Like kids are cool. Kids like each other. Kids love each other. They just want to play and have fun. They notice the differences, but it doesn't mean they treat each other different. So what I want to ask you then is, from your vantage point and your experience, would you say that most of the racism that we experience now, do you think that it comes from an unconscious perspective, meaning that most white people don't really realize the depths of what's going on? Or do you feel like it's a conscious thing and they want to maintain the structure purposely? What do you think about that?
I think it's both, and I think that when you look at um, some people don't realize it because they think it's over, they think it's done. They'll say things like they don't have anything to do with it. They tell people to get over it, that kind of thing. They talk about how they are not racist and they have Black friends. There are some subconscious things that go on with some white people that don't allow them to see their bias. And then you have situations that are on purpose. And I can think of when you look at Donald and when you look at what's going on in our government right now, when you look at Governor Kemp in Georgia, when you look at people who are suppressing votes, that's conscious. There is a subconscious part where they say they believe in, like, yeah, you should have ID to go vote, and you should do this, and you should do this. Those things they can justify in their own subconscious mind as making sense. But in reality, there is an attempt to control and maintain power. In my experience in leading schools in multiple districts, I can see that when you talk about reallocating resources or being equitable, when you talk about making sure that all students have certified teachers, but that it requires a resource shift, when you talk about elected representation, anytime you talk about money and power, there is both a subconscious piece that says it's over, we shouldn't have to do that, that's not fair. But then there's also a conscious piece that is about maintaining power and maintaining the money and the authority and the systems that we have that have benefited them. So I would say that in my experience, there's probably an equal percentage of both. I've talked to people before who don't even believe that police brutality exists and that it's as simple as they should behave or they should follow orders. But yet we saw this week that white people with guns stormed capitals and cities to complain about us shutting down because of a virus that could kill millions of people. And because they were inconvenient, they suddenly excused that they don't have to follow authority and follow the law and follow the rules. But yet, you mentioned Colin Kaepernick's name. and he is still evil to them because he disrespected, quote, the flag in their opinion. And so there is I think, in most white people, a subconscious and a conscious piece of racism that dictates how they respond to situations revolving around people of color and about how we serve others and what rights we, quote, give to others. There is a fairness doctrine that a lot of unconscious white people will talk about. Fairness, it's not fair, it's not equal. And then at the same time, sometimes you can't even get them to open the door to having a conversation about mortgages and redlining and uncertified teachers in schools, but yet they claim that it's all over and they had nothing to do with it. So therefore, in my positions, I have just determined that if I was left to my own devices and I had never gotten to go lead in predominantly Black schools, I would probably still be in that community of white privilege because that's what you get surrounded with as a typical white person. Even the people that are economically disadvantaged white people, there's a quote from back, I think it's the 1940s or 50s, that talks about, and I don't remember who said it, so I apologize, that all you need to do to control white people is to convince them to believe that the highest level of a colored person is less than what they are. So the propaganda that you're seeing out in politics and in the world today is really about fear. And it's a fear of immigration, fear of lack of power. Even people that would benefit more by policies of another political party or a group have identified or latched onto identity politics to be able to say that, you know what, I'm going to latch on to my identity as a white person more than my identity as a middle class and economically disadvantaged person. Because if I put myself there, I'm going to be in the category with Hispanics, immigrants, and Blacks. And it's a conscious yet unconscious choice that people make based on their skin color, is what I've discovered.
Yeah, yeah. And it reminds me a lot of, the quote that's resonating a lot with me now was what James Baldwin said, I believe in the 60s. And he said it was something, he said, white people need to really think about why they needed the nigger to exist. It's something that doesn't reflect us, but it's a way that we're treated. So the question again, I'm not saying this to you now, but the question he's saying is like, why did they need that to exist? And this also leads me to one of my theories. And as I'm writing the book, as I'm evaluating my life experiences, it occurred to me sometime throughout the whole process that in this country, if we don't intervene with both Black and white people, Black people, in my theory, will subconsciously believe that they are inherently inferior. And it's something that I have to make sure when I'm teaching my daughters, because most of the images on TV don't reflect them. So I have to do a lot of extra to make sure they see themselves and they value their skin and their hair. But yet and still, we love Disney like every family. And there is not one Disney movie that tells a story of an African civilization besides Lion King and its animals, right? Me and my wife have this conversation all the time. It's like every single culture is represented, every mythology, but my kids will see the Princess and the Frog, where she's mostly a frog, most of the movie. But then they'll see Tangled, which is about Rapunzel, but they barely see themselves reflected. So we go above and beyond, but yet and still, there's still an inkling in them that wants to have that straightened hair that's not natural for them. On the flip side, my theory is whites, if we don't intervene, they will subconsciously believe that they are inherently superior. And I think that's where we both kind of come in together, because in my mind, I was like, you know what? I cannot fully convince a white person that might have some unconscious bias or racism that what they're doing is wrong. Now I can put it out there, but again, I think as human beings, we listen more to people who look like us, who have shared a similar experience. And I think that's why we work so well together, why we were able to form this friendship and partnership, because it takes two. It takes two. Just like you deferred your student to the African American coworker of yours, a colleague of yours, it's the same thing with me. And I think this was kind of like the origin of the conversation was when I recently, I had a Zoom bombing occurred to a group of my BSU students, and I posted it online to talk about it and make people aware. And one of the things I said was, white people, you have to educate your friends, your students, your kids, whatever, because this will continue to persist unless you do. And there was a gentleman who was actually Hispanic. He said that, well, look, man, all white people aren't racist, so on and so forth. And what struck me about that was, one, I never said that. That's not my assumption, of course. But the other thing is, I think that we need to put more on the work you're doing. I think there needs to be more people who see value in that. And I want to go off on another tangent. Like, so when people even see the hate crime video that I experienced a few years back, the immediate reaction, and I get it, is, well, why didn't the black people intervene? Why would they let her say that? And I always point out to people, yeah, that was unfortunate. But if you look in the back, there was a white girl she was with too, a white woman, and she sat there and did not say anything as well. So I just want to, for people who are watching this, Dr. Snow, who are white allies, or people who are watching this, who are whites, who are attempting to get into some of the work you do, maybe not full-time as a career, but just to make a better impact on society, what would you say to them in terms of how can they better converse with their white friends? Or because if we're not around, I'm sure the conversation is different. So what are some ways they can intervene? What are some ways in which you approach having these conversations with your white friends, white colleagues, so they can better understand the struggle of some people they might not truly understand?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was blessed to have an opportunity to be a part of the Racial Equity Leadership Network in Atlanta, Georgia for a year. It's sponsored by the Southern Education Foundation. And one of the things that they did was they taught us a lot of structures to get people to talk. And there were things like, tell about a time when your race or gender made you feel uncomfortable. And the person that got to speak without interruption for a couple of minutes. And the other person's job was just not to do anything except for to kind of try and reiterate what they heard. And they taught us a fishbowl activity. They taught us dyads and triads, and really helped us to, first of all, just open the conversation. And as a white person who cares about that, I'm assuming that if you are open to caring about that issue, then you're open to how you talk about issues differently. That you're open to ask questions rather than give an opinion and be definitive in what you think. That you're open to engage with people and get them to open up, and that it's not about you. And I can admit, when I first started the work in working with predominantly African-American populations and with school turnaround work, I could admit that at first I was so overwhelmed and blown away by the blatant racism that I called it out, and I called it out forcefully and directly, and alienated some people, because what I learned from other Blacks in the room was, this is the way it's always been done. We can't challenge the system that way. You, Billy, are allowed to say things that we could never possibly say. Well, I didn't know at the time that that existed. So if you're early in your work around addressing white privilege and dismantling systems of oppression, you also have to know that the system does not necessarily give Black people an opportunity to engage to the level that is needed. So I learned that, and I learned that I was able to say some things that they could not say. And then on the other hand, with these other people across the table who were actively pushing back against what I was saying, I learned that sometimes I was too forceful and I was too direct. And I would say things like, this is racist. And so I would make definitive statements in the system racist, instead of saying, well, what's the percentage of certified teachers on this side of the I-10 or whatever the highway is, and what's the percentage of certified teachers on this side, and what can we do about that, and why is that? And so I would say that in my situation, once I learned to ask better questions, instead of being definitive and making a what some people would see as accusation, that changed some of the discussions that I've been able to have. So if you are a white ally trying to address these issues, I would say, first of all, understand the context on both sides and be able to like ask questions and open up dialogue, but don't shy away from having the data and asking the targeted questions, because you can lead people to the right conclusions and the right understanding, and then them being able to figure out how they can fix it. That would be probably my biggest tip about what I've learned, is just that you've got to know the context of what you're dealing with your allies that could be on the side, the white population, and your allies with black people at the table who may not have ever had the freedom to even talk about it before. And I did not realize that. I didn't realize that that was something that was like I've never grown up not being able to speak my opinion. So coming into that situation and and looking at people across the table and seeing silence or hearing silence, and then being able to realize and having people talk to me after the meeting and saying, you know what, Billy, you can say things that we can't say. That's why you don't get labeled. That's why you don't get kicked out of the room. That's why you don't get fired. And so then I became a bridge for how to bridge this group over here with this group over here by asking questions.
Yeah, that's good, man, because even what you don't realize is by you exercising your privilege and even just having a fearless approach, because I mean, even if we go throughout history, I think the fear a lot that exists in our community, especially for people who may have grown up in a time where they saw countless black leaders get assassinated and killed just for speaking up about things we already knew. And even on a smaller side, it didn't happen as much, but there's also historical evidence countless times where white folks who also spoke up would be killed. You know, I believe James Reeb was somebody who was documented in the Selma movie, the Selma experience that people had. You also have people who would stand up sometimes and would get lynched for this. So I think by you showing that that courage, that fearless approach, it's subconsciously also going to inspire a lot of people, regardless of their background, to also speak up. Because for me, it came from seeing my mom do it, but also too, when you have a humiliating experience like mine, I felt like it was humiliating at first. It kind of lets you know that like we're really, what's the worst that can happen. So I just want to applaud you for that and just say to just really just keep on keeping on. And a couple things I get from what you're saying that I think are important for the viewer is it's important for people. Now we might have already made our assumptions in our head when we talk to somebody who might not fully agree with us, but it's important that we don't label. And I think you said it, don't label, lead is what I'm coming up with. Don't label them, lead them with these questions. And that's something even, you know, I think you get that too, being an educator, because even with the student, they'll ask you something and you don't want to just give them the answer. It's like, okay, well, what do you think about this? Or what are some ways we can approach this? And then they start to say like, you might have a point. You might have a point. And even too, not labeling the person bad, but labeling the behavior is bad. Again, another approach for educators. If you call a student bad, that makes them feel horrible. No, you're not bad. This thing you did is bad, and we need to address that, of course. So now tell me this, because one of the most transformative experiences I've had the last couple of years is participating on panels where I was able to talk with people who were white, who were Trump supporters, and actually understanding the thought process for that. Because as somebody who does the work that I do, he's just not somebody who I will ever look at as an ally. And I'll give you another example today. So I'm going for a jog this morning, and my neighborhood is fairly mixed. And as I'm jogging, I see a police car in my neighborhood, and the garage is open. So I look in the garage, and I notice that there's a humongous Trump sign. And there's also like Blue Lives Matter, all this other stuff. And I also look to my left, and I see the officer, and I'm like, wow, ain't this something? Like, of all people to see something like this, it had to be me. Now, a couple years ago, maybe 2016, I might have been like, oh man, this dude is this, and that. And this mindset that I have now, not to say that he might not have some of the preconceived, beliefs that Trump has, but maybe he doesn't. What would you say to somebody who has friends who, are, ardent Trump supporters, diehard Trump supporters, diehard All Lives Matter, and they just really despise maybe being in a forced social setting, or maybe it's Thanksgiving dinner, it's Christmas dinner, Easter, whatever. What would
Mhm.
you say to an ally who has to be in that unfortunate situation for them, and how can they converse with this person? And it's not even to change who they vote for, that's whatever, but like just to change how they might view people. What'd you say
That's
to that?
hard. That's a hard one because my wife has told me, you know, that people don't want to talk about certain things, and people don't want to spend their, Easter dinner or Thanksgiving meal talking about certain things. And she had funny because she equated it. She was like, well, if my father started talking to me about wrestling, I would not want to have anything to do with it because I don't care about wrestling. Um, and so we went back and forth with it for a little while. And I will say that I've had some pretty tense discussions with friends and family members who have been on the other side. But one of the things I've realized is that in reality, um, there are decisions that people are making based on fear, and then decisions that people are making based on unknowns. And when I ask questions, when I say things like, well, have you heard about Tamir Rice? Have you heard that did you see that he was shot within 2 seconds of a cop getting out of his car in the playground, and that he had a fake gun? They don't know, because their regular experience does not force them to have to deal with that reality. So whereas I had done research and I'm incensed by all those things, and I'm incensed by kids in cages at the Mexican border, and I'm incensed by police brutality, and I'm incensed by segregation and racism and economic, inequalities and things like that. I've really learned to realize that a lot of people just don't know because they have not been confronted with it in their reality. So there have been times where I've gotten in arguments with friends or with family members about opposite political views. But now what I realize is that I can ask questions like, well, have you heard of? Or have you thought about? Like, I don't remember the boy's name, but the one in Chicago that was, I don't know why I want to say
Quan McDonald.
Yeah, McDonald.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the one that was shot 16 times in the back.
Yep.
I mean,
That's
at the
yeah.
time of that conversation last year, his name was fresh on my mind, and Tamir Rice and so forth and others. And so I was like, well, did you hear about this? Did you hear about this? Have you heard about this? And the first responses that I got at that time were, well, that doesn't happen. People should just follow directions of authority. And I was like, wait, unarmed people walking the other direction or running the other direction, um, shouldn't you shoot them maybe in the foot? Or, or if you're talking about arresting them, and that's the only way you say that they could get them to stop, if they're unarmed, and like, why is 2 seconds enough when I know that wouldn't happen to me and it wouldn't happen to my children? Or why is Daquan walking away or running away enough to be shot 16 times in the back when I know that wouldn't happen to me? And so the way I started to have those discussions was to rephrase them, to ask questions like, well, have you heard? And do you think that would happen to you? Do you think that would happen to me? And it generally does slow down the conversation enough to where people can talk about it. Because if you just like snap at people and you have an argumentative opinion about police brutality or about Trumpism or whatever the case may be, what I have found is that people go into their fight or flight mentality, and they want to latch onto their current belief and fight you, or they want to run away. So most conversations were ending up in name calling. They were ending up in argument of some sort. But if you can stave that off by asking good questions, it does require us to be more civilized, more more thoughtful in our dialogue with people. But it's actually the only thing that has made any difference is to get people to think about things that they did not know.
That's
And that's
good. That's good.
is to phrase things in question form about what things that they might be able to, like, I know Tamir Rice was shot within 2 seconds and died.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They don't know that. So if I say that as, yes, Colin's right, da 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 da, and I argue with people, I end up in a fight. But if I say things like, have you heard? Did you hear about the boy that was shot within 2 seconds? There's a video. There's a video online, and he was shot within 2 seconds of the police getting there. What do you think about that? It changes the whole course of the conversation.
Yeah, man, that's good, y'all. Free game. Don't label, lead. Ask leading questions. I think that's going to transform the thought process for a lot of people, because these conversations can be intimidating for anybody to reach some type of comfort level. And I think that we have to always understand that, again, we're dealing with people, and people don't like to be labeled. People don't like to be stigmatized. People don't, if we're talking just basic communication skills, people don't want to be confined to a certain thing. So if you just kind of lead them in that direction, that might be able to transform the way that they think a lot about this. So I want to play a quick game before we begin to wrap it up. This has been a very powerful conversation. We're going to have to do a part 2, I'm sure, further down the line. And just first thing that pops up in your mind where I say this word or this phrase or whatever. First phrase. That was a long time ago. Get over it.
Oh. You're nailing me from the beginning. I think what people say to me about slavery and oppression. I've heard that a million times.
Yeah. Wow. And you hear that to your face too as well, huh?
Yeah. Because if I try to talk about how the systems of oppression were established 400 years ago and that they still exist today, I hear that all the time. That was a long time ago. Get over it. I didn't have anything to do with it. And my answer usually is, but I usually try to say I benefit from what they did 400 years ago. And so do you.
Got you. Okay. Give me this now. Say, and I'll let you pick the book or movie that has most impacted my life up until this point is.
Oh. That's good.
That's a good one. Oh,
Book or movie? You know, I can't of one from long ago, but I think about the movie that has most impacted me in recent history has been Just Mercy. You know, sitting in that theater, I thought going into the movie that it was going to be about something that had happened in 1950, and to realize it happened in 1987 through 93, I was like blown away. And I mean, I took my family, obviously, I've told other people about it. And I can't say that it totally changed my life, but it reinforced the things that I had learned in the last several years. I told a lot of people about that movie and about the history that goes with it.
Yeah, that's definitely a movie I still need to catch. And of course, I got plenty of time. So I think I'm going to find that when we get off this call. That's very important. And I'm not sure if you've been, but have you been to the museum that lawyer created in Alabama?
Oh,
You
no.
gotta check that out. Yeah.
Is that the lynching museum or a different one?
Yes, the Lynching Memorial.
Yeah, I've heard amazing things about it, but the Smithsonian African American History and Culture Museum is just in Washington is just incredibly powerful. So I can't imagine how that one stacks against it.
Yeah, that's another one I need to check out. And again, even saying this, and you mentioned in that movie, just reminds me again. I think another underlying theme of our conversation is just the power of exposure. Because for a lot of people, when you come across certain stories or certain injustices, it's hard to hold on to how you felt before. And if you do, you're willfully making that choice, and you have to deal with that on your conscience every day. Like that museum that I went to in Alabama, man, is something else. And again, just when you were exposed to what you went through in your life becoming an educator and administrator, I think that's what we kind of suffer from. There's on all ends, it's a lack of being exposed to what people go through and being exposed to people who are doing this work and being exposed to things that can help in this situation. So, all right, the last one, word
Yes,
association.
yes, sir.
Um, just give me just give me a little, little something about when I say your mom, what
Oh,
comes to mind in terms of the impact she's had on you?
see, that's bad. That's easy. You're gonna make me cry.
I know,
Um,
man.
she's about like seriously, my mom and my kids are about the only thing that can make me cry right now. Um, I think of Hero. Um, she did not realize what impression she would leave by standing up to an abusive husband who physically and mentally abused her. And for her to go out on her own and be a single mom and take care of me and my brother. Um, and uh, even in my latest career, I'm one of the reasons I moved back to Dallas because she was in ICU. For health problems, and I realized my stepdad was not giving her medicine, wouldn't allow her to take her medicine because he did not believe in pharmaceuticals and was all about like vitamins and stuff. So I realized that when I visited her in ICU, and I told her she had to tell him that she loved him, but that she was going to follow the doctor's orders. And she did. And he left her and told her that he was tired of being poor and tired of her being sick. And so I moved in with my mom when I moved into Dallas ISD and lived with her for a while and helped her get back to health and took on her bills and stuff like that. And I'm proud of her that she had the courage to stand up to my abusive father. And I'm proud of her that she had the strength to be a single mom. And I'm proud of her that she had the strength to get away from my stepfather who wasn't letting her take care of herself also. So she's a hero.
Hmm. Very, very heroic, man. That's a powerful person right there. And this underlying theme I'm always finding when you study people who are making an impact or study historical figures, there's always been at least that one person that did something to push them in that direction. For me, it was definitely my mom and my parents just combined. My dad too had a big impact, but my mom was really big in terms of education and Black history. And I can tell you have a lot of your resilience and your determination from your mom. So let me give you something else. So let's say that we're in Dallas now, or we're in Shreveport, and there's a museum dedicated to you, right?
Oh man.
Um, and we're in this museum, and we see, of course, a bunch of stuff about you because it's about you. But then there's one wing that's about influences, right? And these influences cannot be parental, no family.
Ah,
Give me three people, three historical figures that you would say have had the biggest impact, whether dead or alive, on your maturation as a leader in this field of education and equity?
so if I can't use my mom and my family, I'm going to say one of them would be Miss Judy Pardon. She was the principal that hired me as a teacher, and she was amazing. She was like an incredible servant leader. She let me teach. She let me do. She didn't try to micromanage me. And she's been there every step of the way. And in fact, she showed up when I was installed as superintendent and just means the world to me. So Judy Pardon Zuber would be one of them. I would think another one would be um, I mean, I guess it sounds kind of cliche, but I've always admired Martin Luther King, and I admire the alphas, and I've always wanted to be an alpha. And
It's not too
I,
late.
uh,
The grad chapter.
uh, right, right, but I admire the fight for civil rights. I admire the we the sanitized version of him is that he's just a nonviolent resistor, but he's pretty radical in some of his speeches and his pastoral word. And so I admire that, both his meek humility and his radical nature in fighting for freedom. So Martin Luther King Jr. would be one. And I think the other one I've always been fascinated by. John F. Kennedy, and because the youth and the energy and the excitement and the space race and this idea that America could be something more and America could be something innovative. And that whole decade of the 60s was so hard. And so many people got gunned down and assassinated, but I think that he would be the other one that I would be really, really influenced by, and I've always been interested in.
Yeah, that's good, man. He actually has a intro on the song of one of my favorite rappers out right now, a guy named Jay Electronica, and he plays the excerpt from that space race speech at Rice University. I love it, man, because it gets you hype. As we choose to do this not because it's easy, because it's hard, and I think that encapsulates the work we do, man. It's not, you have to have a passion for this stuff. It's not something you just jump into. You have to truly understand it and really love the people that you serve. So now I'm going to close it with this right here, and I'm taking it up another level in terms of depth and deepness, man.
Oh goodness.
So so when it's all said and done, now we already got the museum, right? So now we're looking at a history book, right? And it has a section about Dr. Snow. What does it say? When it's all said and done, what's Dr. Snow's historical impact on America and the world?
Well, I hope it says that I've influenced a whole set of teachers and principals, because I really take quite pride in developing others. I had a lot of teachers of mine that have become assistant principals and superintendents, and I've had a lot of principals that I've supervised that have gone on to do great things. So I hope that it says that I influenced educators and grew educators. I also hope that it says that I've influenced kids, even from the time I was a principal, to kids like Markavion, who taught me about life and about Black history and about oppression. I hope that it says that I influenced children and then made the world better through education. And then finally, I would say that I hope that part of it is about the impact that I've made on my children. I'm really proud that all three of my children are progressive, and they are open, and they are accepting. They can talk about race issues and equity issues like an adult. And for teenagers, I think that's super cool, that they are not just sheltered white kids, but actually can talk about their own space, but then also a space that they have learned about through my experience as an educator and through their experience. And I hope that I've made a difference in what they think about what's right in the world.
Yeah, you're definitely doing that and some, man. So thank you. It's been a pleasure having you in on this conversation. Where can the people connect with you if they want to connect with you after this viewing?
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me, and it's been a really awesome conversation. You can find me at the website, which is www.transformationleadersnetwork.org, or you can find me on Twitter at Snowman Learning, or on Facebook under my name, Billy Snow, or also the Facebook page for Transformation Leaders Network. And then finally, on LinkedIn, you can find me under my name, Dr. Billy Snow.
All right, share this far and wide, y'all. This is a powerful conversation here that's going to change a lot of lives. I already know it. You know me, Black history saved my life. In terms of Dr. Snow, it was his mother. It was his experience as an administrator. So I need y'all to take all this stuff in and really think about what's going to save your life moving forward. share this and make sure everybody gets a chance to take part in this great conversation. And we out, y'all. Peace.